Welcome, everybody. This is Illiterate. My name is Evan.
My name is Taylor. I read a book this week.
I watched 2 movies this week. You know already. You clicked on it. We're doing The Kissing Booth. Particularly, The Kissing Booth 2 just came out on Netflix July 24th. It's the biggest thing out right now. It's number 1 on Netflix. It even brought its original, The Kissing Booth, back into the top 10 on Netflix, which is like staggering. And I completely disregarded it because I never ever thought that this would be based on a piece of pre-existing material. This is based on a book. This is crazy. I was shocked. So that's why we're doing it. It's the biggest thing out this week. And lo and behold, it is based on something. What are the odds?
It's also bizarre because who would know that that is the biggest piece of media? This odd teen cheesy rom-com. I have a quote from the chief content officer of Netflix, Ted Sarandos. He said, the first one was one of the most watched movies in the country and maybe the world. And according to them, what's also crazy is that 1 in 3 viewers rewatched it based on their metrics. So it wasn't only just popular, it was doubly popular.
This is wild. This is bigger than I ever knew. So why not? Let's get into it. It is about a girl who has a best friend, a boy best friend. They're born in the same day, the same hospital, and they grow up together. When they get later into high school, the girl starts kind of crushing on her friend's brother. And most of the films are about how does she keep up both relationships.
And hilarity ensues.
Yeah.
But also a bunch of other nonsense. Some reviews critically hated.
Completely panned. Oh my God.
Atrocious. Some quotes, a sexist and regressive look at relationships that highlights the worst impulses of the genre.
Oh.
Another one, it feels like it was written by someone who simply digested everything she told was romance. Nearly every cliche in the film feels cribbed from another movie. Just universally hated.
Just on that note, I've got a list of a couple movies that are shorter than The Kissing Booth 2. The Kissing Booth 2 is over 2 hours.
God.
Yeah. Rear Window is shorter than. 12 Angry Men is shorter than. Sunset Boulevard, Good Will Hunting, Singing in the Rain, To Kill a Mockingbird, Moonlight, The Empire Strikes Back, The Favorite, Gravity, all shorter than The Kissing Booth 2. They're kind of massive movies, but I have got to say outright, they're not hard to watch as you know, they're not beautiful pieces of filmmaking.
Right.
It's an epic, entertaining,
controversial piece of media for that reason. I also saw it's technically a trilogy, and the third film, like Lord of the Rings, was filmed back to back. So the next Kissing Booth 3 is coming out in 2021, but they filmed it the same time as Kissing Booth 2.
Kind of a shock. Nobody even realized that there would be a third one to begin with. So it has a huge weekend, and on Monday they're saying, and guess what? There's another one coming. Good Lord.
And we already shot it. So here's the question that boggles us. How is this popular? And I've got 4 answers and one that ties into the book, which we'll explain. One of the reasons, lack of teen romantic comedies, specifically for this generation. So we talked about Clueless in another episode.
Right.
The Breakfast Club is a big one. Mean Girls, even for our generation.
And look, that movie's already, it's pushing 20 years old. The movie came out in 2004. We're getting on it. So if Mean Girls is almost 20 years old, sorry to make everybody feel old. I know I am. Then think Clueless. That's another decade older.
Yeah. There isn't really an aspirational, exaggerative teen rom-com that exists in the current stratosphere space. Right. So
that's where I saw the use in it. And it's a double-edged sword that we'll get into. That there's part of it that is big teen escapism. It's big and pretty and lavish with crazy set pieces and beautiful actors. And, it is pure escapism. And there's a place and time for that. But if it can't be your gold standard, and we'll get there.
Yeah. Number 2 reason that it might be popular, Jacob Elordi and Joey King, the 2 stars, they had a real life romance that percolated on set. They're not together anymore, but that boosted their Instagrams up to millions and millions of followers. And because this is Jacob Elordi's first movie, so it really elevated for people that are interested in that sort of thing, the stardom and the mixture of real life and on-set romance and all of that buzz.
It's that teen energy, man.
Horniness. That's what it is. Number 3, Netflix did a very rare thing, which was advertising it on TV nationally. So it's odd that you would see a Netflix commercial for a show on cable.
Right. I do remember seeing them. It kind of put me off guard, but then it did what it was supposed to do, because I'm like, oh yeah, I do remember there was a first one. Interesting. And then I went, I'm watching a Netflix commercial?
Bizarre. And then the fourth thing, the way that Netflix even found out about this, is this service website called Wattpad. And just as a tease, we won't get into it just yet, but it's something that gets 80 million monthly users.
Yeah,
massive. It is a mix of fan fiction and self-publishing. Some of our listeners probably know about it, but that is how this thing was found. But I thought before we even get into Wattpad and this thing being found, to talk about what it mixes well, which is fan fiction and self-publishing, things that I don't think we've covered yet on the show and are a huge part of literature and film.
I mean, these are the types of formats and deals emerging right now as we're continuing growing our technological advances. That this is percolating a new kind of platform, a new corner space that maybe can actually drum up some huge money. Like that's what we're looking at.
Right. So let's talk about fan fiction first. Before copyright, it was not uncommon for authors to directly pull characters and plots from other sources. Like, this is a big part of writing in general. I believe we talked about this when we talked about Shakespeare in regards to our Hamlet episode, how there was a Amleth, which was this old story that he was curbing from. So Shakespeare did this a lot. Romeo and Juliet is based on an Italian tale that was called The Tragical History of Romeus and Juliet, which came out in 1562.
Shakespeare, the biggest fanfic writer of them all.
He is. Just some other ones real quick. Othello is based on a Moorish captain, which was published in 1565, and Much Ado About Nothing pulls characters from 3 different poems that were around at the time. Taming of the Shrew, he pulls a plot line from Supposes, which was an Italian play.
Oh.
So you're right. He was just a fan fiction fiend. Just taking plots and characters and
contextualize them.
Yeah, everything from all of it. So, and then another facet of fan fiction that maybe people say it's uncreative, but a big piece of it is it's often reduced to kind of the sexual elements of a piece of work. The classic, like, Harry Potter fan fiction.
Draco and
Harry Potter together,
that's
stuff
what
like
I'm
that,
in for.
It's fans, taking the characters and recontextualizing them into their own fantasies. But a lot of it ends up being sexual. This is not new to the modern era. So the first thing that really saw this was Gulliver's Travels. And I'll post a link. It wasn't even necessarily writing, but artwork related to Gulliver's Travels. Some quite bawdy things with him and the Lilliputs.
Oh, no. Oh,
so like I said,
no.
I'll post a link to it.
If you haven't guessed yet, this is going to be our most salacious episode yet.
But Gulliver's Travels started the sexy fan fiction artwork.
That is bizarre.
The Tumblr, the Tumblr artwork of the 1700s was for Gulliver's Travels. Lastly, some other work around this time, and I didn't know about this guy, Samuel Richardson. He had a classic novel that came out in 1740 called Pamela, and it was about a lady's maid who was on an isolated country estate, and she resists the advances of the squire, her boss. Sounds very romancy. Readers, though, were interested and liked to envision scenarios where she gave in, because this was a prudent time, so she did not succumb to his advances. So his arch nemesis, fellow novelist, this guy Henry Fielding, was critical of those puritanical ideas, and he created his own version of the book Pamela, where she's just playing coy to increase the other guy's lust, and she's sort of this super sexy villainess laying out plans to entrap him. And it came out the next year, and it's called Shamala. And readers got a kick out of that. And then he also, this guy Henry Fielding, wrote a book called Joseph Andrews, which is a gender reversal, and it's Pamela's brother who resists the seduction of the landowner's rich sister.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So this has been going on for hundreds of years. So that's kind of the historical piece of fan fiction, that it has been around for a while, from Shakespeare into the Industrial Revolution.
Very interesting.
Specifically as it relates to sexual content.
It's funny that's all that seemingly is always like a cornerstone of it.
Right. Yeah, it's not new. Not new at all. So now let's talk self-publishing, because that's the other side of this.
Right.
Traditional publishing, how that works is the publisher bears the costs and the risks, but retains the profit if the book is successful. And that's how most books go. You give it to Penguin Press. They front all the advertising, pay you money, but then maybe you don't get as big of a percentage if it does well. But if it doesn't do well, then they just paid you a bunch of money and wasted their time. Self-publishing is the other option where the author takes on all the cost and risk. They say, I'm going to front the money to get this book out there, but
When it
then
gets
if it
successful,
profits,
I keep it.
I get a bunch. So the self-publishing is not as well known or successful because of that risk. Very few
Right.
people either have the money or there's more people that just do a bunch of stuff and doesn't do well. But it's not uncommon really in artists that we do know about. So the big one that we talked about before, Jane Austen. Remember, she
Mhm.
fronted the money for Sense and Sensibility, and that was
Right,
her first.
yes.
And then that guy printed it on weird paper and didn't do well. Um, Emily Dickinson, Mark Twain, Edgar Allan Poe, Rudyard Kipling, all of them at some point fronted their own money to self-publish.
Oh, interesting.
So it is maybe a piece of, if you do want to become an author and you don't believe that the publisher knows
If
what
you
they're
don't feel like you're
doing.
not getting a good deal, and if
Yeah.
your material's not being put in the proper place, then yeah, I mean, I assume a lot of people would self-publish if they could.
Right. So
Um,
that's you're bringing up a good point. The stigma until ebooks, self-publishing, it was called vanity press because it was egotistical to think that you knew more than a publishing house did. And it was just these small presses that for the right price, they would print it. But then it's like, how are you going to, you can't put it on Barnes and Noble shelves. Like before ebooks, it was not easy at all to get
right.
your thing out to people. But of course, we love the success stories. So you also have a more modern example is The Martian by Andy Weir.
Ah, yeah, that hadn't occurred to me. Yeah.
So he published that on his website, one chapter at a time for free, and then put it out on Kindle. Again,
All together
e-publishing
at the
helping
end.
a lot for 99 cents. Sold more people read it for 99 cents than they did for free on his website. So then a publisher bought the printing rights for $100,000. And of course, it spent 19 weeks on the bestseller list, and the movie
Wow.
that was based off was the 8th highest grossing film of 2015.
Yeah, directed by Ridley Scott and
Yeah.
starring Matt Damon.
So that's a crazy success story. I thought it was also interesting that he, alongside the self-publishing thing, also ties into the fan fiction world. So previous to
Oh,
this,
no way.
he had written a fan fiction prequel to the book Ready Player One.
What?
And in an updated printing of Ready Player One, I think after 2016, it is now the prologue prequel. It became canon to the Ready Player One story.
Whoa.
So it's in the books now as
Whoa! So, like, actual fan fiction then crossed the barrier and became
Yeah.
canon. That's incredible. I've never
Yeah.
heard of that before.
Yeah. So he had huge success in both self-publishing.
Can you imagine if,
and
like,
then-
Star Wars, like, wanted to adopt, like, a fan film on YouTube into their like,
Right.
you know, like, that's what we're talking, like, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah. So now let's talk about where the Kissing Booth came from, which is a merging of these two things. And it's a website called Wattpad, which came
I was
around.
totally
Yeah.
oblivious to this.
Yeah, as
Completely.
was I. I mean, maybe I'd heard a snippet of it, but it never
Right.
interested me.
Right.
Came about in 2006 by this guy, Alan Lau. It started just as mobile reading. So that was his goal. He was like, we want to be able to have people to read things on their cell phone. But he
Okay.
had no knowledge of the publishing system. So he was like, well, how can we apply the YouTube methodology to it, which was just getting big there as well. So he's like, oh, well, we should have user submitted stuff. And it was very depressing. He said in the first 2 years, they had maybe a few hundred users. But also remember, this is pre-Kindle, pre-iPhone,
Yeah, what year is
pre-smartphone.
this? Yeah.
So 2006. So it's still like people reading it on the
Mhm.
flip Nokias.
You've
but he
never
had
seen an iPhone yet
Right.
at this time. That's the, you know, like
It wasn't an app. Yeah, it was a website.
I forget because I forget how far and how fast we have come since 2005.
Mhm. Yeah.
2000 even. I mean, my God.
Yeah, people did not read stuff on their phones. So that's what he was interested in making happen. He also, the big bulk of it came from people submitting their own things. And as it just grew over time, I think by year 6 was when he really saw the hockey stick spike of users. And like I said before, they have 80 million monthly users. The other thing that really helps is they have a social media element to it. So there's interactive commenting in the margins. So you can click on a particular paragraph of a piece that somebody has written, and you can see the hundreds or whatever comments that people have based
About
on
that
that.
particular piece.
And so that's where it's been very prosperous in terms
That is
of
really cool. I've never heard of
Yeah.
anything like that. To actually like a you know, follow along with an audience somehow. Is that you're
Yeah.
reading a book, but somehow you're able to see everyone's reaction to this specific line.
And it's funny that it's not just, because you can easily see comments at the bottom of a blog post, but to follow with it, line by line and expand it and
that's the
see.
part about it that I think is incredible. Is line by line, you can see the reactions. You're with it. You can follow along even years after the fact. Like
Yeah.
and have an audience that's somehow together. That's really staggering. I've never really even considered something like that for books. I mean, good lord.
Yeah. There's also
line by line. That's
because
awesome.
most of these people, so 70% of the users are female and 80% are millennial or Gen Z. So there's been academic studies about whether this particular model aids in writer growth, or it does or doesn't help the quality of it or the amount, because this is a big part of the people that do put stuff on here, is
Right.
it allows you to just keep putting out work. If you feel like the weird person in school because you like to write, well, you can put this up on here and get millions and millions of people to both read and comment and critique
And maybe
on
it'll
what you're
become a
doing.
franchise on Netflix. You never know.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what's crazy. So on the homepage now, I went to it for Wattpad. The advertising is see your story. And then the three things they say is get produced to movie or film, get adapted to TV series, and then third, get published. And they talk about the different partners that they have.
Click, 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 click.
Yeah. So I guess that leads us to, let's talk about what the fallout is of this type of thing now becoming more accessible, both the combination of fan fiction and self-publishing.
Okay.
One of the things that started it out was Twilight, which we all know about. And if you're interested in us doing a whole bigger series or something on that, I
we
know
could
we haven't
definitely
touched
jump
it,
into that.
but it's a massive thing. And also the newer book is coming out next week, I think, from
Oh, no, another
the
Twilight
guy's
book?
perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, let us know. Maybe we can do a run on that sometime. That'd be really fascinating.
But that came out in 2005. We all know 4-book, 5-film saga, 3.3 billion in the global box office.
My principal and football coach both read it at the same time. Shocking.
Loved it. But starting the controversial young adult, is it sexual enough or not? Is it too escapist or not? All of that stuff. She did not have a self-publishing fan fictional background, but this is kind of where it opens the door to seeing, oh, here's this layman person who hasn't really done anything, who then has this giant 100,000-page book that makes billions of dollars.
Somehow, some way, Hollywood got the idea that they could take a no one writer with some subscribers and make it into a massive franchise, like the biggest franchise of it at its time.
Mm-hmm. So that's the start of that. Now we have all of these works that are about vampires and werewolves and paranormal stuff. We come to this gal, Beth Reekles, who originally, and she is the author of the book, The Kissing Booth, who wrote it on Wattpad. So she started in 2011 because she said when she started writing, Twilight was big, everything was paranormal, and she wanted a regular high school romance.
Right.
So this thing racked up 19 million views on Wattpad
because it was accessible and relatable. It was down to earth. It wasn't it wasn't genre or tone. It was supposed to be more real. It was supposed to be a real experience, and just trying to figure out how to navigate that.
So then publishers come looking for her through Wattpad, because at that point they don't even know. I mean, she's just a username.
And she's how old?
She's 17.
Oh my gosh.
She hadn't finished high school. Yeah. But it was interesting because they started searching for this American girl because it takes place in Los Angeles and it's American school, but she is actually from Wales in the United Kingdom. So Random House discovered her there.
Okay, I didn't know that either. Wow.
Yeah. Which is interesting because coming from the context of what we're talking about, where it's like, oh yeah, this is a 17-year-old girl who is writing to anonymous people on the internet in England. She had no intention of it becoming, at this point in what the website is, a multi-million-dollar international teen icon sensation.
Right.
And if you're 17 years old, you're in the thick of it. You're not writing from a retrospective standpoint of like, what am I trying to get people to learn about this? No, you're
trying to understand the storm while you're in the eye of it, which is incredibly hard to do. But there's also there's a validity to that. I mean, she is a 17-year-old girl. So, I mean, when it comes down to the dialogue and really the plot and what's going on, I get it. That's not the problem. It's everything around it that just starts. I worry about kids thinking that it should be their high school experience, because I'll tell you, if this is your high school experience, if you relate to these people and everything that they have and do in these things, you're really lucky, because that is just not the case. And I hope that kids aren't looking at this and being discouraged about where they are in
Yeah.
their life compared to what they see on the screen. That's where I think this can do detriment.
Mm-hmm.
Where this can do good is if you don't take it too seriously and you really want to just breathe and have some fun and be entertained. Don't take it too
Yeah.
seriously. I think it can do a lot of good, and it can make you think. I mean, there's not nothing going on here in the plot. This is a girl that is really torn. She has her lifelong best friend and his brother, and how do you keep both of those going? There's some meat to that,
Yeah.
and there's interesting questions that come up along the way for sure. I just wish that it. I fear that it will make kids more depressed about their own situation. I just
Yeah.
I don't I would rather something where kids aren't distracted by how pretty their houses are, the cars are, or like what they're
Or there's
those
already
things
enough
bother me about it.
escapist. I don't know. I can't speak to it. I mean, maybe that's why it's also an interesting thing, which is why we brought it up. Critically hated, but yet why it's almost like I wouldn't maybe
Hey,
necessarily
I
say a
watched both
train
of them in
crash,
one
but it's like,
day.
yeah,
Like,
you can't look away kind of thing as
yeah,
well. It's like, well,
you
why
know,
there's
and
a
I
reason it's
experienced it.
popular.
I
Yeah.
experienced it just the same because I wasn't expecting to like be into it, and I sat there and watched both of them in one day. I wasn't sick of
Yeah.
it; it was entertaining, but it is thought provoking in a lot of different ways beyond just what's presented in the plot,
Yeah.
and the conversation around it. And around even particular character archetypes, there are
Yeah.
there's big conversation as to whether this is misogynistic or if what is this
Abusive and
trying to
all that
say
stuff.
exactly?
Yeah.
What is this
Yeah.
saying about female identity? What is this saying about masculinity?
Yeah.
All
Well, let me
of those things. It runs into some troubles, and a lot of people don't like it, and a lot of people do like it.
right.
Uh,
Let's talk about
yeah,
two other things that are come after this that maybe inform the discussion a little bit more. So 50
yeah.
Shades of Grey by E.L. James on the 2013 Forbes list of the highest earning authors, $100 million. It was saying that at that point she was probably earning $1 million a week
Oh my
on these
god.
books. Her thing is based on the thing that we talked about before, Twilight. So she's a middle-aged woman. She had absorbed Twilight in a few days, then set out on her own to write the fan fiction sequels in 2009.
Oh
She
wow.
used the names Edward Cullen and Bella Swan, put it up on fan fiction sites after discovering that was a thing online. And
But
then
this is the beginning of 50 Shades of Grey, the plot, but it's
it is
using
50 Shades of Grey.
it
Yeah,
is
yeah,
50
yeah.
Shades of Grey, but it was originally thought of as a fiction extension of the Twilight series.
Yes, exactly.
Wild. Oh my
And
god.
so, but she didn't even know about the fan fiction world. But then she put it up on there. People liked it. She decided, again, to self-publish, tying both of those things together. So she publishes it on Kindle, changing the names, though.
Sure.
And then it was bought by a publishing company in 2012, then sold massive amounts, not the self-published form.
I had no idea.
Yeah. The other thing, which she
Edward
doesn't
Cullen.
tie into, E.L. James doesn't tie into Wattpad, but this one does, and this is even more recent. There was a movie and book called After that
Yes.
came out by Anna Todd. This one had over 1 billion hits on the site Wattpad.
Now,
And
correct
so
me if I'm wrong. That's After started as fan fiction about Harry Styles?
Yes, so this gal Anna Todd was a One Direction fan. She portrays them as students at Washington State University, and the story follows Tessa Young, who is an quote innocent good girl who gets caught up in a relationship with the bad boy who is Harry Styles. And then when it was no longer self-published and became the print book and the film, the name was changed to Hardin Scott instead of Harry Styles.
Gotcha.
But it was entirely One Direction fan fiction that was then self-published through Wattpad.
That's what I thought, but I wanted to verify that. How bizarre. And it has a sequel coming out either this year or next year.
The sequel is coming out this year. This gal, Anna Todd, loved, she said, 50 Shades, which is why it was based in Washington and Seattle, because that's where 50 Shades was. But also 50 Shades is based there because Twilight was based there. And it was a fan fiction. So it's just this rolling wave of fan
After
fiction.
is based in Seattle, Washington because Twilight.
Of 50 Shades because of Twilight, yeah. But it's just amazing, her story and how she was able to get this. She was 25 years old, was a waitress at Waffle House and at the makeup counter at the mall, was on chapter 80 of this thing, writing it from her phone on Wattpad. They contracted her because they wanted to turn it into a multi-part series, but she kept ignoring their emails because she was like, oh, this is spam. They finally called her and then gave her a 3-book deal in the mid six figures, and then Paramount bought the film rights. And now there's a sequel. From that, she has written 9 more books.
Oh, wow.
I think the thing, going back to sort of what we were talking about in tying this to the kissing booth, I had seen, according to the National Domestic Abuse Hotline, there are several warning signs that you might be in an abusive relationship. And the unfortunate thing is these elements plague all of these stories, as well as all of these stories being written by women.
That's
And
kind of what that was part of what I was interested here. Is I knew this was written by a woman, and I knew it's rewritten and directed by a man. The Kissing Booth in particular.
It's just an odd contrast.
It's a very odd contrast that it's coming from a female writer, but then being comported through the lens of a male. I wonder how much that has to do with what is lost in the material there. And I want to restate again, it's not that I would not say that the film is presenting this as you should be like this and this is okay. They just don't do quite enough to say this is bad.
Right.
It doesn't quite go into, whoa, he's over the line. And it doesn't ever give the Noah character enough agency to really peel those layers away and understand. If you had that piece of it, perhaps you can recontextualize that and give him more of an arc that makes all of his actions make more sense and give him actually a place to end up by the end. That doesn't really happen.
And perhaps knowing some of the context as we do of fan fiction and self-publishing, it's like the intent behind these original things. Now it's changed on Wattpad, but originally it's like, oh, here's somebody who is young and in this place in life. Or in the case of 50 Shades of Grey, a middle-aged woman she's like, this is just my midlife crisis writ large on the page. She said that. It's like, it's not designed to be the authoritative text on what you're supposed to do in these situations.
A 17-year-old girl is likely just not going to have the answer, even like, I don't know, like maybe, but I think the purpose of her writing here is not about trying to say something about these particular themes in particular. She's talking to a larger experience and it's largely fantasy.
When you're reading that on Wattpad from somebody, you're not expecting that. But if you're watching it as a massive production on Netflix, you do expect them to say something a little bit more.
Right.
So you said you had something that might be a good counter to
this.
Yeah.
And before one more thing before I move on to that, but my thematic problems here, I think, are mostly contained to the first movie. His characteristics, those crazy characteristics, somehow don't carry into the second movie. He has one moment where he's about to get into a fight and he doesn't. And that's it. So it's interesting that I feel like they heard all of that criticism and then tried to redirect on it. And I think they're mostly successful, but it still does not give the Noah character enough agency to be able to say, this is why he is what he is. Yeah. So I just wanted to say that. I think the Kissing Booth 1 is more of the guilty party here than the sequel. But just moving on, if you're interested in these types of themes, I mean, this is the plot here is a girl is dating her best friend's brother, and if you want something more real, if you want something a little more grounded, but dealing with all of these same themes, one suggestion I'd have for our audience out there is the 2016 film Edge of 17. It's directed by a woman. It's starring Haley Steinfeld. She was from True Grit.
She's a singer as well.
She's a singer. She was in Transformers. Yeah. She has a new show, Dickinson, on Apple TV. Lovely actress. She stars in Edge of 17. The plot of that, high school life gets even more unbearable for Nadine when her best friend Krista starts dating her older brother. So it's almost identical in the premise.
Yeah. And I've actually seen this, and it's much more, it's much more real and grounded. I really enjoyed it, and presents the complications and confusions of teen romance in a more awkward, less over the top way.
This is not spectacle and fantasy, and it's not like depressing.
It's humorous.
It is just very in the middle. It feels very real, and you're not supposed to be looking at what the cars are driving, what they're, it is much more grounded. But dealing with so much more, much of the same thematics that the Kissing Booth is. So if the Kissing Booth is a bit too fantastical or big or weird for you, but you're interested in you're looking for something really dealing with this on a grounded level, Edge of 17 is right there. I can't say enough good about this film. I think people really missed it in 2016.
And then alongside talking about the Kissing Booth as a property. These actors are still actors and people, and they are continuing to do other things. It's interesting that the actor Jacob Elordi, he's on a show now on HBO called Euphoria, and it's pretty much the exact
Mm.
opposite of the Kissing Booth. It's about
Mhm.
teenagers and drug abuse and addiction and sex, and it is very
I
controversial, I guess, for the rawness and reality with which it depicts those things. And people are saying, oh, maybe it even has the criticism of like it goes too
Too
far
far.
into the reality as opposed to the unreality. But I thought it was interesting because Jacob was saying, he's like, it's almost like righting my wrongs a little bit because the character in the Kissing Booth is awful and it's never really explained. And so he says, I suppose this show is showing why. Not that they're tied to it, but it's interesting that it's
Sure.
like, yeah, that was the first movie he ever made as an actor was The Kissing Booth.
Oh, wow.
And so now all of these actors as well, it's like we're doing other things. We're seeing what other options we have as actors. And so there are other pieces of media. It's not like he is Noah.
Right.
I think
Right.
that
Right.
kind of gets lost in like the fan fiction. Were they dating? All of that stuff is all mixed up. It's like, no, there are other people. And even he's saying, hey, I realize that maybe this wasn't the best character to play.
Right. Yeah, I haven't seen Euphoria, but I have heard nothing but incredible things about Euphoria on HBO. So if you're interested in some of these things, if Kissing Booth is maybe too fantasy for you, Euphoria might make you feel guilty for things you never did.
And if you know or write on Wattpad or know any of this stuff, I was just fascinated by the self-publishing and fan fiction world. If that's something that you're interested in, please message us. Let us know what you thought of the Kissing Booth. If you did like it, if you read the book and thought,
yeah, anybody out there that's had experience with Wattpad or might know anything about this. I mean, what did you think about what did you think about the movie compared to what you read in the entire platform? It's a totally new thing for me, so it's really interesting, and I don't know where it's going to go next.
Yeah.
But if anybody out there has any thoughts on that, we would love to hear that.
reach out to us at illiteratepod on Instagram. Send us a message.
All right. Well, thank you, Taylor. This has been great. We will catch you all on the flip flop.